Hey guys, today's video is looking at metabolic pathways. I know this is something we've struggled a lot with in the practice test, and I just wanted to help clarify it because it definitely pops up in your final test for cells. Just as a reminder on metabolism as a whole, all the biochemical reactions carried out by living organisms is called metabolism. All right, and then when we break that down, it's the fact that not many chemical reactions in a cell occur as a single reaction or in one step. All right, so they form part of a metabolic pathway. All right, so that's chains of reactions to get from the original reactant, or we will start calling this a substrate, to the final product. So there's a few key things that are important here. So the fact that metabolic pathways occur in many steps. And the other thing is that each step is what we call catalyzed by a specific enzyme. And by catalyzed, we just mean sped up. So it speeds up these reactions. So as an example, you can see here that we have substrate A, so first substrate, that can only be catalyzed, or the reaction can only take place with a specific enzyme, so enzyme 1. Alright, so once this reaction's taken place, we end up with a new product, so product 1. But because this is a metabolic pathway and product 1 isn't the final product we want, we end up with a new substrate or a new reactant. Because remember, we use these interchangeably. When we're talking about DNAs and proteins, you'll hear the term substrate a lot more. So substrate 2 can only be catalyzed by enzyme 2. All right, and then we move on and we make a new product. So the second product in this metabolic pathway becomes our third substrate, so the reactant that only works with enzyme 3, and then we end up with our final product here. Okay, so we can see that we end up with 1 reaction, 2, 3, until we get to our final product. So in many steps. So that is really important here. So before we move on, I just really want to clarify the following terms, substrate and enzyme, because it's going to come up a lot. So substrate is, as I said just before, the reactant in the metabolic pathway. So a really good example that we should all know really well is cellular respiration. So as a reminder, we start with glucose and oxygen, and then the reaction occurs and we end up with 2 products. So we end up with CO2 and water, so H2O. So when we're looking at this in terms of our substrates, they are our reactants. So glucose and oxygen on the left-hand side of the arrow always are our reactants or our substrates. And then we should know that on the right hand of our arrow over here are our products. Okay, so that is really important. The second thing we're looking at is, or that comes up, is enzymes. So they're actually proteins. They catalyze, so speed up metabolic reactions. Each enzyme is specific for its substrate. So that's really important because we know that this process above cellular respiration actually goes through many steps. So for example, we know that glucose goes through, so we can write down here, glycolysis. All right, and that's broken down into pyruvate. So we can say that glucose over here is the substrate. A specific enzyme, we'll just say enzyme 1, will be used during glycolysis to make our product, pyruvate. That now becomes our substrate 2, And that might undergo our second step. So in Krebs cycle, that will be broken down even more, and then we'll go to the electron transport chain. All right, so just as an explicit example of something that we've seen before, we know that cellular respiration, it doesn't just go straight from this first stage here to these end products. All right, so we have multiple metabolic pathways and steps that occur for this to happen. This here is just an example that shows two substrates binding to a specific enzyme, so one stage of a metabolic pathway. All right, so we can see that we have fructose 6 phosphate and a phosphate. They are our substrates. We can see that they are binding to a specific, remember, specific enzyme. So phosphofructinase up here, and you can see that their shape fits in here perfectly. All right, so that is where the specificity comes into play. So remember, each enzyme is specific to its substrate. All right, and we can see that we end up with our new product, sorry, so fructose 1 and 6-diphosphate. All right, this could be a final product if this was a one-step metabolic pathway, or this product could become the new substrate for the next step in the metabolic pathway, as you'll see in the next slide. So this example here is showing the same thing, but over an entire metabolic pathway. So instead of just one of these reactions taking place, it's showing the whole pathway getting from enzyme and substrate 1 all the way to the end product. All right, so as a reminder, at each step, a substrate binds to a specific enzyme. So substrate 1 and enzyme 1 are complementary to each other. You can see that their shapes fit in perfectly here to one another. All right, it then says we have an intermediate A. All right, so intermediate just means a new product, but it's not the end product of this metabolic pathway. So it's still a product, but it becomes our new substrate for the next reaction. So intermediate A can only be catalyzed by this specific enzyme here, enzyme 2, which then makes a second intermediate B. All right, so intermediate B is the product from intermediate A and enzyme 2 reacting. It makes intermediate B, which then here undergoes a final reaction with enzyme 3, making our intended final or end product for this specific metabolic pathway. All right. Something that's really important to note is if one of these enzymes weren't working properly, then the metabolic pathway would be cut off or wouldn't be able to continue. All right, and that's because of the specificity of each enzyme to the reaction it catalyzes. All right, so a really good example is if enzyme 3, so just say this one, in black, if enzyme 3 wasn't functional, it means that yes, we would still make intermediate B here. So we're making this product, all right, but it means that past this point, nothing is going to happen. All right, enzyme 3 is not going to break that down, so we get to our final product here. Okay, so we're not going to get to the final product. We are going to end up with lots of intermediate B built up in the body because it can't undergo a further reaction, whether that's a build up or a breakdown reaction. All right, so as well, this end product, so you can see a few of them here, also wouldn't be able to be made. So if this product has essential roles in the body, the end product, for example, maybe it's a hormone that regulates sweating, this person would likely sweat more than the regular person who produces this end product hormone. All right, so it can have lots of issues for people who have particular enzymes that aren't functioning well, and that leads into our exam practice question. That leads really nicely into our exam practice question. All right, so first thing with a practice question, you need to identify which topic? Alright, so which topic is this question asking you about? This is really specific. It says up here metabolic pathway. Alright. However, without that, you should still be able to identify that because look, it's a multi-step pathway using different enzymes for each reaction. Alright, so it's either breaking these down to get the new product or it's building them up. Okay, so even without that metabolic pathway at the top, I would hope that we would be able to figure out what this is asking us. Alright. The second really important thing with breaking down a question is, do you need to know all of the crazy words and terminology in this question? Do you need to know what this disease actually does to someone or how to pronounce it? No. Alright, we know that I can't even pronounce half of these words, and that is fine, okay? That's what exams are going to do. They're going to try and stress you out by using big words that you haven't heard before. Alright, so to help you summarize key information, something that I find really useful is to, if in doubt, either draw, especially if it's asking you about a process, or write it out. Okay, so that is exactly what we are going to do right now. Okay, so we're going to summarize some key information. So first thing is, there are 2 genetic metabolic diseases associated with this metabolic pathway. Okay, so we are going to call them Fenny or Alka, because like I said, we don't need to know how to pronounce these. So for Fenny, cool. So if I go through this, people with Fenny accumulate phenylalanine. Cool. Alright, so I've summarized that. Perfect. People with alka accumulate homogenistic acid. Homogenistic acid. Right, and then it gives some more detail. It says, if there's a lot of this present, urine turns black when exposed to air. So, turns urine black when oxidized, okay, when there's O2. Cool. Summarize all that. Which of the following statements? So, what is the actual question? Is it saying which ones do or don't relate to this information? So, which is most consistent? Okay, because sometimes what they'll do is they'll say isn't most consistent. So, you need to make sure that you're double checking. So, if I break this down, so Phenny accumulates phenylalanine, however you say it. So we can see that this is up here. Okay, so this is what would accumulate. So meaning that we're going to end up with a buildup and lots of this. Alright, so if I'm going to end up with a lot of this in the blood or in my system, it means that past this point, not much is going to happen. So it means that we're probably not going to even get down to tyrosine. So that means that for me, I'm going to assume that enzyme 1 isn't breaking this down. So I'm going to summarize that. So down here I'm going to say enzyme 1, no, not working. Okay? So is this consistent with any of these responses so far? So if I go JKLM, none of them mention enzyme 1. Okay, so I'm just going to leave that there and move on. So alka accumulates homogenistic acid. Okay, so that is this one here. So it means that we get all the way from enzyme 1 to enzyme 5, which breaks it down to this. But past that point, we're accumulating this, right? So past this point, it's not breaking down or building up anymore to this point here. Okay, so enzyme 6 mustn't be breaking this down. So I'm going to say, enzyme 6 isn't working. Okay, so at this point, we're not going to get past there. if I look at my answers, does it match any of the responses? So at the moment, yes. So J, people with ALCA lack enzyme 6. That matches my information that I have here. So ALCA, we found out that enzyme 6 doesn't work. That's all well and good, but I want you to double check your answers by ruling out the others. Okay, maybe if you're running out of time, you might not do this, but if you have time at the end of your exam or you know you're running quite well, I would double check your other answers, which I'm going to go through on the next slide. All right, so just really quickly, can we rule out the other ones? So we have specified that we think J is correct. All right, so first thing, it's saying people with Phenny lack enzyme 2. Okay, so if we lacked enzyme 2, we would have a buildup of Phenny and Tyro. So we would have both. But then we probably, actually in saying that, we probably wouldn't because it has this output all the way over here as well. So I'm going to say that most consistent with the information, I'm going to rule that one out, okay? Because we're probably not, well, we're not going to get a build-up because, yes, enzyme 2 is not working, but that is kind of like a side metabolic pathway. The rest of this whole pathway can take place even without enzyme 2 functioning. All right, so that's not consistent. The next one, saying that people with Phenny and Alka lack thyroxine. Okay, so if we find where thyroxine is, let's do that in yellow. Thyroxine is here. Okay, so people with Phenny, we know they don't go past this point. So yeah, they're not going to have thyroxine in their system because they're not even going to get to tyrosine here. But people with ALCA, we know that they get all the way to this part here. So they're going to undergo this, they're going to undergo that, they're going to undergo that breakdown, meaning they will have thyroxine and they won't lack it. All right, so it means that, yes, if I only said this start part, people with Phenny lack thyroxine, that would be consistent. But adding in that people with ALCA will lack it makes this incorrect. And the final one, M, people with ALCA usually have light coloured hair. This isn't mentioned anywhere. Okay, so it says dark pigment in hair and skin, all right, but it's not consistent with any of this information. All right, so again, we can rule that out. So we can clarify that yes, we have the correct answer